Braves and baseball fans, it's time to take a trip from coast to coast across Major League Baseball.
There it goes, a long drive. If it stays fair, home run.
One strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung on and missed a perfect game.
Fly ball deep left center. Grissom on the run. Yes! Yes! The Atlanta Braves have given you a championship. Listen to this crowd.
Left side, Swanson to first. Braves, world champions.
Braves and baseball talk, straight from the diamond. Here's Grant McAuley.
Hello and welcome to From the Diamond. As always, I am Grant McAuley, and this is our first episode in quite some time, our first episode of the new year. The hiatus is over, spring training is underway, the World Baseball Classic is getting started, opening day is right around the corner, and From the Diamond is coming back to Sports Radio 92.9 The Game in Atlanta on Sundays, all baseball season long. Let me go ahead and ask a rhetorical question. Why is today the day that From the Diamond is cranking up for 2026? There's been plenty of Braves news and happenings and things going on. I have not been able to make it down to Northport to be around the team to get the usual content that I'm able to get. Not that there's a shortage of stories coming out of Braves camp. But before we jump into all that, I want to remind you, as always, to subscribe to From the Diamond wherever you get your podcasts. You're probably already following me on social media, but if you're not, at Grant McAuley on X and on Instagram. You can also find me on TikTok. And if you're looking for links to everything I've got going on, including the articles I'll be writing for the Marietta Daily Journal, FromTheDiamond.com is the place to find all of that. You can also follow my baseball card adventures on social media if you'd like to do that. It might be a welcome distraction from what we're going to be talking about on this episode of the show. But without further ado, let's jump into it. Let me answer the rhetorical question, why is today the day to crank up From the Diamond for 2026? Well, the Braves got some bad news. It sounds eerily reminiscent of where we were not even 1 year ago. I'm going to pull back the curtain on this episode of the show more times than not. In fact, just about every time. I like to do a lot of research. I like to pull some statistics. I like to do a lot of reading and prepare a whole bunch of topics for what's going to be 20, 30, 45 minutes or more worth of baseball talk. I don't know how long this episode is going to be, but I'm going to go ahead and shoot just like a good wrestling promo in my mind should be. You already know what you want to say, you know what you need to say, you know what you got to talk about. You just got to go ahead and put it out there. And I think that this is probably how a lot of Braves fans are feeling, and I've taken the temperature on social media, which can be a dangerous game. There are a lot of opinions out there, and everybody's entitled to theirs, but what exactly has happened with Jurickson Profar for the second consecutive year? It just brings that frustration to an entirely different level. The Braves are a club that has had the last two seasons marred by injury, but in the midst of all of that and trying to overcome guys who just couldn't be on the field and some guys that weren't able to perform because of the injuries even when they were on the field, this isn't that story. This is the story of a player who has been suspended not once, but twice after signing a 3-year, $42 million contract, the biggest deal of his entire career. And he has been on the field for half of one season and will not appear in a Braves uniform in 2026. Jurickson Profar has been suspended for PEDs for the second consecutive year. That's the headline. That's the news story. I think everybody has that information by now, but as we ticked into the later hours of the evening on Tuesday, we finally started to get the details of what exactly it is that Jurickson Profar tested positive for as Major League Baseball officially announced his 162-game suspension for his second violation of the league's policy on performance-enhancing drugs. Last year, it was HCG, which is a fertility drug, that triggered an 80-game ban for Jurickson Profar just 1 week into the regular season. Fast forward to roughly 11 months later, not even one full calendar year, and the Braves and Profar find themselves back in the same exact boat, and I would argue that it's one that's taken on some serious water as far as Profar and his tenure with the Atlanta Braves. This time around, the entire 2026 season has been wiped away as Profar has been handed a 162-game suspension after testing positive for exogenous testosterone. Now, what exactly is that? I don't claim to be a doctor, but doing the research on this, it is a testosterone replacement therapy. So this replaces the body's naturally produced testosterone. Draw your own conclusions for that. But the long story short is this kind of thing is not allowable under Major League Baseball's provisions for performance-enhancing drugs, and thus Jurickson Profar has lost an entire season to a suspension. Now, as I said, I didn't organize a whole lot of notes, so I'm going to shoot from the hip here and just kind of go through what I feel is the fallout from this. And let's start with Profar himself. This is a guy who once was the top prospect in all of baseball some 16, 17 years ago with the Texas Rangers. He bounced all around the league. He basically looked like he might be on his way out before a resurgence with the San Diego Padres in 2024. That got the attention of the Atlanta Braves, who signed him late in the offseason just before the 2025 season, giving him a 3-year, $42 million contract. That's the quick history lesson of how Profar ended up in a Braves uniform. Why exactly was he signed? Well, it was to provide a switch-hitting bat to the lineup in hopes of jolting what had been an underperforming 2024 Braves club. The underlying metrics for Profar's breakout season, if you will, on the other side of 30, I think they suggested that he could be a good, not great player. The numbers were certainly solid. They represented career highs across the board in just about every category, yes, but these are not the kind of numbers that you would look at and think, this screams superstar. What it screamed was a useful player, switch hitter who had power and the ability to get on base. Just the kind of useful player. Again, to use that word, useful player. You weren't asking him to come in and make a huge impact. You were just asking him to come in and do his job. But as fate would have it, he wasn't able to do that for much of the 2025 season because 7 games into the year, he received the 80-game suspension for the first of his PED violations. Now, I'm not here to point the finger at Jurickson Profar and say that his suspension was the thing that undid the 2025 Braves. Injuries and underperformance definitely did a lot of the heavy lifting for why the Braves had their first losing season in the better part of a decade. But I am here to tell you that it contributed negatively to what exactly went on for the Braves last year. And while Profar was able to come back and mend some fences and make some contributions in the second half, I really think that 2026 was his opportunity to atone. It was his opportunity to show up every day, his opportunity to do his job, to live up to that contract. And now he's not going to be able to do that. And for me, since this is my show and I'm going to pull out my soapbox, when Jurickson Profar reported to camp and was anything other than just open to doing whatever the team needed and wasn't really excited about being the DH, it just rubbed me the wrong way. Now, that's anecdotal. It didn't mean that he was going to be suspended again. It just was one of those things that I felt like wasn't a great look. But in hindsight, that pales in comparison to what we were talking about right now. However, in the midst of all of that, being asked about the DH spot and maybe not liking it and ultimately getting around to saying what he should have said to begin with, which is, I'll do whatever the team is asking me to do because I want to win and that's what it takes. He got there eventually, but I'm not awarding any points for how it happened. In that same media session, WSB's Allison Mastrangelo asked Jurickson Profar if he had gone through this offseason using the knowledge and the lesson that he had learned from last year when it came to his PED suspension, and this was their exchange.
Last year wasn't a really good year for me and the team, but the team is looking really good this year, and just here and ready to help the team make the postseason and go from there.
Did you do anything this offseason to make sure that mix-up that happened before never happens again, type of deal?
Yes.
Now, I don't know if at that point Jurickson Profar had been tested and this thing was on down the road and the Braves and Profar were waiting for the league and the Players Association and the findings to come out and become official in all the proceedings that have to go on before this thing is rubber stamped and announced publicly. I've also seen and heard a couple of different sources insinuating that maybe the Braves were aware that they could have a problem with Profar's availability yet again, so they signed Mike Yastrzemski. I'm not sure I sign off on that completely, because the Yastrzemski signing, I felt like, was still a meaningful signing for more than just depth. This was a hitter that really profiled well for Truist Park, that could help them play the matchups, and if Marcell Ozuna is not going to be your DH, and Jurickson Profar is not a great glove, why not go get a Mike Yastrzemski and use him to your advantage as the Atlanta Braves? So signing Yastrzemski made the club better. It should make the club better. And the Braves, I'm sure, have their fingers crossed collectively at this point that it will do just that, because Mike Yastrzemski's role on this team just got a hell of a lot bigger with no Jurickson Profar in the picture. Well, by now we're all familiar with the offensive struggles of the Braves following their historic 2023, that record-setting season. All the homers, all the runs scored, the things that you hoped were going to be indicative of the Braves lineup for years to come, that became more of an outlier because the 2024 club, after a hot start for 6 weeks, struggled to score runs for the majority of the season. Then you got into the first nearly 4 months of 2025, and it was the exact same story. In the midst of that were a lot of injuries, including Ronald Acuna Jr. That's no small thing. You want to point to one player that can negatively impact the Braves lineup by being absent for a long time? It ain't Jurickson Profar, it's Ronald Acuna Jr. The Braves got Acuna back, though, halfway through last year, and they began to put things in a different order, if you will. Jurickson Profar was getting at bats in the leadoff spot last year. I'm not a huge proponent of giving somebody who's not the best hitter on the team at bats in the 1, 2, or 3 spot of the order. I do not care if they are a switch hitter, for the lineup balance or whatever else. Jurickson Profar can get on base, but I thought it was wild to give him at bats, especially more than Ronald Acuna Jr., more than Matt Olson. Austin Riley was gone for a big part of the second half, but I'd throw him in that boat as well. And while we're at it, I'll throw Drake Baldwin in that boat. So that's just kind of the read that I got from last year. But in talking to Walt Weiss at the winter meetings, and obviously because the Braves have paid Profar money and expect him to be a useful player, to use that term again, they were going to give him the opportunity to get meaningful at-bats in important spots in the lineup. Whether that was batting first or second or somewhere in the heart of the order, Jurickson Profar was part of the plan, part of the solution for the Braves' run scoring in 2026, and now he has been yanked right out of that equation. What are the things that can make the Braves better? I think Ronald Acuna Jr. back at leadoff is a big one. I think Drake Baldwin getting an opportunity to bat in the second spot, that has my full attention. Then you expect Matt Olson and Austin Riley and Ozzie Albies to make their contributions, and you can start to piece things together beyond that. But the Braves have a talented roster on paper. We've seen that for years. Are they going to be able to, A, stay healthy, and B, produce individually and collectively the way that they expect themselves to? That can only be answered when the bell rings, when the season gets started, and of course, over the 162 games to follow, and, fingers crossed, the opportunity to play some more meaningful baseball in the month of October for the first time in a couple of years. So as I looked around, scrolling on social media and just kind of gathering information and ultimately leading me to come sit down in this seat and turn on this microphone and talk about this situation in depth, there were a lot of different reactions that caught my attention. And one of those was from former Braves outfielder Kevin Pillar, who rightly pointed out, there are guys coming to spring training fighting for jobs. I mean, there are guys all year long fighting for that opportunity in the minor leagues. So Profar's actions are not only profoundly selfish on an individual level and on the team level, but for his overall chosen profession, it is hard to stomach. The very visceral reaction that I received on social media to my post, which was, quite simply, I can confidently tell you that Jurickson Profar is the worst free agent signing in Braves history. And yes, I know that spans a lot of different players and different circumstances, but that is what I feel based on the context around Profar's latest suspension. A lot of folks were quick to point at other players who underperformed their contracts, and again, there's no shortage of those. It doesn't make those contracts or those deals any better. Whether we're talking about B.J. Upton 10 years ago or Nick Yastrzemski in 1990 or back into the 80s with Bruce Sutter, all of those players underperformed their contracts, yes, but those players weren't actively making decisions to take themselves off the field and away from the team. And yes, the Braves do not have to give Jurickson Profar $15 million this year, but they are still on the hook for that same sum in 2027, and at this point, I think it's a sunk cost. I think he's made his last appearance in a Braves uniform. A year ago, I think the Braves players were able to take a measured approach and I think keep some of the emotions and the responses relatively quiet. But for the second time in as many years, for the same player to go out and get suspended for basically the same reason, I can't imagine that everyone is going to hold back this time around and that Profar is going to be able to rebuild the bridges that his actions and the consequences of those actions burned to the ground. So yes, I think Jurickson Profar is the worst free agent signing in Atlanta Braves history, and the reasoning has everything to do with the circumstances and the context around why Jurickson Profar is for the second straight year going to miss significant time. A few of the other names that were thrown out there, I'm well aware of what B.J. Upton did, or more importantly, did not do in a Braves uniform. B.J. Upton did not choose to become a lesser baseball player. For whatever reason, he did not perform up to his expectations or, obviously, the expectation of the Braves or Braves fans. You can mark that one an L in the books, quite obviously. You look at Bruce Sutter, who was the best closer in baseball at the time that he signed with the Atlanta Braves in the mid-'80s. There should have been tread on the tire, but a shoulder injury and Bell's palsy combined to end his career by 1988. And hey, kudos to Bruce Sutter for getting a huge deferred contract that paid him well into the 2000s for essentially 2.5 or so years on the mound for the Atlanta Braves. Flash forward to 1990, Nick Yastrzemski, coming off a huge season with the Boston Red Sox, signs to play first base with the Braves, plays for basically a couple of weeks, and then vertigo keeps him from ever playing Major League Baseball again. Yastrzemski didn't give himself vertigo. He was not asking for that to be dealt to him, nor was Bruce Sutter with these injuries. If you want to point at a guy like Dan Uggla or Mike Hampton, I mean, there are other underperformers and other guys who have been injured in other circumstances that have led to disappointment for players in a Braves uniform. Guys who were acquired to make an impact to varying degrees. We even got to trot out 2020 Cole Hamels and get outraged about that again, although I will stipulate, I will play devil's advocate for this one continually. He was only paid $6.6 million for that contract. Yes, he got $18 million, but the shortened season prorated that deal. He only made one start. He only pitched 3 1/3 innings, but in talking to Max Fried over the years that followed, he pointed back to his time with Cole Hamels for helping him to take that next step in his career that we saw in 2020, in 21, and in all the years that have followed. That's no small thing. Is it worth paying $6+ million for a mentor? I don't really know, but if you stretch that out over a number of years and the production that the Braves got from Max Fried, I'll give Cole Hamels a pass. But what I cannot imagine giving a pass to is a player who continually makes decisions that hurt both the team and himself in the process. I just don't feel sorry for Jurickson Profar. I'll just categorize him for what I believe that he is, and that is the most disappointing and worst free agent contract that the Braves have signed. Well, now that I've laid that all out there and told you what I think about it, what are the Braves going to be able to do on the other side of Jurickson Profar's 162-game suspension? Well, there's the matter of $15 million that is no longer owed to the guy that was supposed to get the regular at-bats at DH. Could the Braves go out and spend some of that money to bring in another hitter, a free agent hitter, and who in the world is out there? Well, the first name that springs to mind is the well-respected veteran Andrew McCutchen. With Marcell Ozuna signing with the Pittsburgh Pirates, it pretty much meant that room at the inn for McCutchen was not going to be found in Pittsburgh this year. Does he have the desire to play someplace else? Now, McCutchen is well-traveled, but he has been in Pittsburgh the past few years, and it seemed like he was going to ride off into the sunset there. But if he does want to saddle up for one last ride, is Atlanta a place that he would want to play? If so, I think he would make a nice compliment and a good hedge for Mike Yastrzemski, who hits righties extremely well, because McCutchen does the work against lefties you need him to do. Now, he has been DHing quite a bit in recent years, but McCutchen pointed out on social media not long ago, in fact, within the last couple of weeks, the only reason he wasn't playing the outfield on a regular basis, even though he'd asked to, is because the Pirates didn't have a need for him out there. But could Andrew McCutchen play a serviceable left field that's at least commensurate with what you were going to get from Jurickson Profar, who was not a good defender, by the way? I think that he could, and I also don't think that you're asking Andrew McCutchen to go out there 162 times. So playing him in the right matchups at the right times, giving him some at-bats in the DH spot, and waiting for Sean Murphy and Ha-Seong Kim to come back, and then figure out what that rotation looks like. If McCutchen is open to that kind of arrangement where there would be some moving parts, I think that's a deal worth moving on, and I don't think it's one that's going to cost you a whole lot. Now, let's go back to what the Braves had said going into the winter was going to be their biggest need. That's starting pitching. Losing Jurickson Profar hasn't changed that picture, but way back at the start of spring training, Spencer Schwellenbach and Hurston Waldrop both needing surgery, that has changed the complexion of what the rotation looks like. And even though a lot of the options that were out there 3 or 4 months ago have either signed or been traded at this point, there are still some pieces out there that Alex Anthopoulos could install in the Braves rotation that could at least stabilize that mix. I know they talked about wanting a frontline guy, and maybe that guy is available at the trade deadline, and the Braves will have the prospect capital to make that kind of a deal happen. But I think at this point, if you're going to be without Spencer Schwellenbach for 3+ months, without Hurston Waldrop in your picture, even if he wasn't going to break camp with the team, you still have questions about Grant Holmes and Reynaldo Lopez and Spencer Strider, and to a lesser extent to me, Chris Sale, who may have an extensive injury history but has been dynamite with the Atlanta Braves and only missed time with a fluke freaky injury in 2025. So stabilizing this rotation, being able to hold things together until you can get back Spencer Schwellenbach, and no small thing, but he's got to stay healthy on the other side of elbow surgery. I think that's worth looking into. So whether that is a Zach Littell, a Lucas Giolito, guys that at this point, I think it might behoove them to wait until there is a club, kind of like the Braves, that has a pitching injury and decides, hey, it's time to aggressively pursue one of them after their market stalled out over the course of the winter. Now, it's also worth pointing out that time is ticking. You're going to sign a pitcher with about 3.5 weeks to go before opening day. Yes, they've probably been throwing on the side and getting themselves ready for this opportunity, but will they be ready to go and give you what you need at the start of the season? The longer you wait, the less likely they'll be able to impact you early on. Now, if the Braves do have a healthy Chris Sale and Spencer Strider and Reynaldo Lopez and Grant Holmes and Bryce Elder, that is the makings of a capable rotation. But that is a fairly big if on some of those individuals and the collective rotation that will only feel like it's been answered when these guys go out there and perform every fifth day. But even with that in mind, and with Schwellenbach and Waldrop potentially coming back at some point, I think you're still left holding your breath if history is any indication, and for the Braves, the recent history is an entire opening day rotation ending up on the 60-day IL last year. So those are the things that are currently going on with the Atlanta Braves, and that doesn't make you necessarily feel that great. But I will say this, as I've looked at the big picture for spring training and begun to kind of gather those thoughts and, create that little checklist of the things you need to see leading up to opening day. A healthy Ronald Acuna Jr. goes a long way. A healthy Austin Riley could go a long way. The same thing for Ozzie Albies, who's been battling injuries for a number of years now and is looking for a bounce-back season. Also on this list, of course, is Sean Murphy and Ha-Seong Kim. You need those guys to get back and get healthy as well. You got Mauricio Dubon, who can play just about everywhere. He'll start at short for you. You've got Drake Baldwin behind the plate, but the Braves, I think, are better when they have both of these catchers available to them. They can sort things out in the DH when Sean Murphy gets back, and it does sound like he has made good progress, but the Braves aren't going to be rushing him, and the opportunity for him to be healthy for the first time in, 3, maybe 4 years, that could be a difference maker for him at the plate, where he has struggled to find consistency since the second half of the 2023 season. When you add up all the pieces on offense, even with Profar out and Ozuna gone, the Braves have a collection of talent that a lot of clubs across the National League and baseball would love to have. But health and productivity are the questions that the Braves have been dealing with for the past couple of years, and unless or until they're able to produce up to those expectations, the questions will still remain. Even with the injuries that the Braves have faced over the past few years, even with the injuries and now the suspension of Profar that the Braves are looking at in 2026, the Braves are still looked upon as contenders in the National League, a World Series hopeful, and as far as the in-house expectations go, the Braves expect to find themselves back in October and playing meaningful baseball again. The time is critical, though. There's no two ways about it. Alex Anthopoulos has perhaps an opportunity here in the wake of the Jurickson Profar suspension to make a splash or to at least provide some answers to his club and a boost that stems the tide from what is no doubt a major disappointment for this team. If that's going out and getting somebody to help them on offense, that is one way to answer it. If it's addressing the starting rotation and adding somebody who can stabilize that starting five, I think that is a worthy pursuit as well. And time will tell if Alex Anthopoulos is ready to make those moves now, or if something will present itself down the line that's just not on the board right now. So that is what is going on with the Atlanta Braves from where I sit. Some good, some bad, some ugly, if you will. But there is baseball coming our way in about 3.5 weeks. Again, From the Diamond will be coming back to your podcast feed and to Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. Sunday, March 29th is the first full 2-hour show. We may be talking even more between now and then, so make sure you subscribe to From the Diamond wherever you get your podcast. And our first 2-hour show on 92.9 The Game will come your way on March the 29th. Until then, enjoy the Grapefruit League action, and we do have baseball back in our life every day until we don't in the early part of November. I, for one, am always thankful for that and appreciative of every one of you who have tuned in to listen to this show, to follow me on social media at Grant McAuley, and to talk baseball with me all year long. But that is going to do it for this edition of From the Diamond. I look forward to talking to all of you soon, and until next time, so long, everyone.